Alright guys, got a really interesting game to share with you with a very important endgame lesson in this. This is a game I played yesterday against my buddy the Muggle-born Prince from India, and this could also come under the category of how did I lose this game, because the Muggle-born Prince actually really had me on the ropes in this one. I haven't run the analysis on it. We're going to work through it on site and then maybe we'll analyse at the end. So we've got French defence, normal, advanced variation, and now c5 and c3. This is quite common at this level. Not the most common move at the master level. So the idea is that if I take on d4, white can then recapture with a wing pawn as well. So I bring out my knight, he brings out his knight, and now queen to b6. So the bishop is the only defender of this pawn on b2, so that's kind of tying the bishop down. And it's also adding a third attacker to this pawn on d4. It's currently defended once, twice, three times. Okay, brings out his bishop to e2, I bring out my bishop, because I'm actually preparing another move here, which is f6, the second main pawn break in the French. And the idea is that we're trying to disturb this pawn chain in the middle, and because we've also got deadlock as well in the middle. Now I want to be attacking towards the king here, so disrupting this would make sense for black. And the idea here is that if white was to capture, you can recapture with a knight, free development, and then you've got a stronger pawn centre and actually better development as well. So now he brings out his knight to a3. I capture on e5, he recaptures with the pawn. And now I push c5, because there's no pawn to take this pawn now, and I want to constrain this bishop, keep him off this diagonal here. Also, the knight still can't go there, and the knight now retreats. Okay, well, this also comes with a discovered attack by the bishop on the knight there. So the knight retreats to c2, I bring out my bishop. Now we've got a bit of a battery going on, and the idea of this is that I'm looking down at f2, so white would quite often want to centralise his rook to e1, but he can't play that now because I capture with check and win the exchange and a pawn. So we have knight in now to d4, which is a nice move. Again, it's defended 3 times, and it's attacked 3 times. So it doesn't really make sense for me to initiate that exchange. I play my knight out now to e7, and the idea here, I've got a couple of options. One is that I can come around to g6 with 2 attackers on this pawn now. Alternatively, I might bring my knight straight to f5 in some cases. But now I'm getting ready to castle, and I have a semi-open f-file for my rook. Now he brings out his bishop to e3, and here I make a blunder. Well, first I go ahead and I capture the pawn on b2, seeing as the bishop has just moved, right? However, notice that, because I'm figuring, well, look, this bishop is under attack, this knight is defended twice, right? What's the issue? There's nothing to worry about. However, knight takes c6 now, and he's threatening to capture again. However, it comes with a discovery by this bishop on this bishop here. So I now have 2 pieces under attack. This is a classic double attack. So I take the bishop. So right now we're kind of equal. I'm just up a pawn, but I have, again, 2 pieces under attack, right? Now, if he simply recaptures my bishop, I capture his knight, and we're kind of even. So he takes my knight, I recapture. Well, I don't recapture with the king straight away, because if I recapture, I'm just going to lose my bishop. And then we've got a completely open f-file. So first I think, well, I may as well grab another pawn on my way out. So bishop takes f2 check, rook captures, and I capture the knight. So now my king has moved, and now I'm not able to castle. Now, these are the kind of things you need to just be talking to yourself about as the game progresses, okay? Black now can't castle. And what does this mean? Well, one thing is that while the queens are still on the board, so while we're kind of in the middle game, this is not so good for black, because my king is exposed to a lot of fresh air, a lot of angles. So white does have attacking opportunities. White's king, on the other hand, is quite safe in the corner there. Okay, now, should the queens come off the board, then having your king closer to the center of the board and activated is generally better. All right, so now we have bishop takes c4. Now, if I simply recapture the bishop here, I'm going to get queen to d6 check, and then my king can't go there, or there. So my king then would have to retreat to one of these squares. I can't really come to e8 because then queen takes e. No, that's defended by the bishop. But that would be kind of unpleasant. So I grab the pawn. Now with the idea of queen takes bishop. You'll notice that I was playing yesterday. Admittedly, I was not playing at my best. So the bishop now moves to b3 where it's protected by the pawn. I centralise my rook. So I've now got 2 attackers on this knight, but it does have 3 defenders. Rook across to c2, attacking the queen. I just move across to e3 with check. King now moves into the corner. Okay, now this turns out to be important. So I do have some ideas here. I mean, I could, for example, capture the knight, pawn takes. Now I can't really take with the queen because again it's still defended a second time by white's queen, so that's not really an idea. Okay, bishop to d7 now, at least connecting the rooks on the back rank, giving myself a little bit of protection. Rook comes across to e2, attacking the queen. Queen drops back to b6. Rook across now, maybe preparing a discovery. So the threat here is, for example, bishop takes that pawn, and I can't recapture, I have to do something with my queen, so I'm down a pawn. So I block that attack with my bishop, now also looking at this rook. So the rook slides across to b2, creating a battery now against the bishop. I defend the bishop with a6. But now a4 is played. Okay, now this, if the bishop wasn't there, this would be quite a winning move, really, because it's attacking the pinned piece. So my bishop couldn't move if this bishop wasn't there, because I'd lose my queen, right? But I can move the bishop. So bishop c6, and now, yeah, and he's got ideas. He could grab the pawn. So he does grab the pawn. I move my bishop back, and we trade bishops. Okay, so now the situation is I'm down a piece because my opponent has an extra knight, but I'm 1 pawn up. Okay, I've got a pawn majority on this side, and the other pawns are mirrored. Okay, so rook takes pawn with check. King drops down, rook there, trade rooks. Rook, king e7, trade rooks again. Okay, so what we've got here is a lot of simplification, and this kind of makes sense. White's thinking, look, I'm up a whole minor piece. Now that the pawn majority has been eradicated, the pawns are completely mirrored here, and the minor piece should be enough. And he's absolutely right, the minor piece should be enough. And now, queen to d6. With check, also attacking my undefended queen. There is no other move. I have to trade queens. Okay, and this is a reasonable move in the ending when you have a majority. Pawn there, king e8, knight now comes in looking at a pawn. I push h7 to h6, and the knight grabs. So this is actually a fork on 2 pawns. Okay, king d7. Now this is, you would imagine this is a winning position for white. Okay, I'm about to lose another pawn, and I grab this pawn. Now, however, this is what you have to be aware of. Okay, this is all down to reading the board. Now, what do you have to do in the end game? in the end game in chess, your goal is to convert the game and get the best result possible. Right. Now, white has a king, but notice that the king is all the way in the corner on h1. Okay. White has a pawn majority on the king side. However, these pawns are still on h2 and g2. Right. I have one pawn here which is probably not going to play any part in the proceedings. Okay. White might waste some time trying to capture that pawn. However, look at the queen side. White has an advanced pawn on the 4th rank. My pawn has only moved 1 square, but look at where my king is, right? He's right next to the center of the board. So we have knight to h5, and now I come after this a pawn. Okay, now I grab the a pawn. Notice that white does have an extra minor piece, but it's a slow piece. Okay, knights are slow. They can only move, not that way, they can only move this many squares at a time. Okay, now what you have to say to yourself is, okay, if my opponent is going to win this game, what has to happen? In other words, what do I have to prevent? And here, the big risk is the king moves off the a file, and this pawn simply makes his way to promotion on a1. So let's just go back a couple of moves. So here, the knight is under attack. Okay. Now here, I would, as white, I would play probably knight to c5 with check and also attacking this pawn. Now, if black is going to win this game, the only way it's going to happen is for this pawn to promote. Okay. But white here grabs that pawn. Now this pawn here is probably not instrumental in converting the game, because on the king side of the board, white has 2 pawns. I've got 2 pawns, he's got 2 pawns, and he's got a king. Okay, and he's got this pawn here, and he's got a pawn here. Right? These pawns are extremely unlikely to get through a 2 pawn and a king opposition on that side of the board. So here, I think the critical move is for white to take out this a pawn at all costs. Okay, but he comes after this pawn, he grabs the material. Okay, and now my king comes across, and now he's activating his king, but I grab the a pawn, and now the king moves again. Now, what has to happen to stop this a pawn promoting? This pawn is no threat whatsoever, this guy, right? He's no threat. Okay, he can't get through 2 pawns. It's not going to happen. Right? White has to stop this pawn. So what he has to do is he has to use his knight. Right? His king can go 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay? I have to move my king out of the way. 1, 2, 3, 4. So let's say I move my king here. But again, my king can then stop the progress of white's king. Okay? But the knight can go 1, 2, let's say 3, or 3. Okay. So he has to use his knight to guard these promotion squares. Okay, even if it means sacrificing his knight to take out this pawn, the king recaptures. White then has king and 2 pawns against a single pawn, and he's very likely to convert that way, but he has to eliminate this pawn. That's the only thing. Right? Now, after this move, again, he's got knight to here. He could win the extra pawn that way. So this is actually also something worth calculating, right? So let's say, for example, white plays knight to here. The king's got a choice to make. He's going to have to move out of the way and come after this pawn. But this is where you simply have to use your fingers and toes to count, right? So knight here, king moves, grabs that. King comes after this pawn, boom. Right? He's already got a pawn on the 4th rank. Okay? So that would be, I think, very, very possible. In a race, he could actually convert quicker if he forks here, but he doesn't fork there. He plays knight to h5. And that's a really odd move, because he's moving his knight away from the critical square on the board, right? He has to stop the pawn getting to there. So why move your knight away from there onto the h-file, stopping the progress of this pawn. This pawn is not the threat, right? This pawn is absolutely nothing. This pawn is the threat. This guy is the danger, okay? So he plays that, the king's come across, and now he moves his king again, but now his king cannot prevent the advance of the pawn, right? Because my king has a force field all the way around him, and the king simply doesn't have time to get through. I move my king to here, right? Whatever happens, 1, 2, 3, I just move my king to there before that happens, and then once my king's on this square, the pawn has a clear run. So now the knight is activated, and now a5. Now the knight is activated again, but look, because my king's already here, the knight can't make forward progress towards the pawn. Okay? He can't even come to here. So what's he going to do? Pawn moves. And now his pawn's come up, but it's too late. I've got a queen. Okay? Queen there with check. I could have taken the pawn. Another check. Now attacking the knight, so the king has to go to one of these two squares to defend the knight. King comes here. I grab the pawn with check, so the king either now has to capture the pawn, but if he captures the pawn, queen takes knight with check, so that's not really viable. We have pawn takes, another check, another check, another check, another check. Now I grab the knight, and now we are in a very, very classic endgame. It's worth just going over this so that you know it. You've got a king and a pawn against a king and a queen, right? This is winnable for black. The king moves out of the way and I give check. So basically the rule is anytime the king drops behind the pawn, preventing the pawn from advancing, you move your king in, okay? So king there, king in. King here, check. King in. Grab the pawn, okay? And that's the end of the game, okay? So let's go back a few moves. Say let's go back. So to here. I mean, this is fine. Okay, I attack the knight, he grabs the pawn. This is absolutely fine. King here. Now let's play this through, okay? So now, as white, let's say we do this, right? King grabs the pawn, white grabs the pawn. So we've got two pawns against two pawns and a king. That's in white's favour on this side of the board. Now black has to stop this pawn. So I would now play this. So what white wants to do now is to keep my king over here, over this side of the board somewhere. And then he should be okay pushing forward. But look, king in the corner, not a good idea. So let's say we have a check. I move in. I can't check with a pawn. So maybe now pushing forward with a pawn makes sense. Black comes in. This takes some thinking though, doesn't it? I'd like to defend the pawn, but maybe now my knight can simply come in. Now, black's king cannot abandon this pawn, right? So let's say I take the pawn. Okay, and now we have pawn up. And this is now completely winning, right? King comes back. Let's say the king comes in, king attacks the knight. Knight back, king comes in here. King pushes forward. Let's figure it out. Probably king up. Your king is now your most powerful piece. King to here. Do have a check. So these three squares, all these four squares are not playable. So if I check, king might come here. Check again. King can't go there, or there. So king comes back to here. This is now I would say a completely won position. Let's take the opposition with a king. So now the king still can't proceed. Can't push that pawn because takes, undefended. So what's he going to do? King comes back. Let's say a check. Can't go here or here. King comes back to here. Push a pawn, takes. And what's white got now? Right? If he moves his king away, well, he can't go there. If he moves his king like this, white's king's going to push forward. He can't push the pawn because takes with check. So let's say king comes here, white's king comes forward. Again, this pawn can't move. The king can't go there. King comes here. Can't go there. So can't go there or there or there. There's only one move actually for black, and now the pawn goes straight home. Okay. So really interesting there. And it all comes down to reading the board, telling the story on the board, right? It's what is the critical issue in the ending. White here should be in a winning position. He's up a pawn and a minor piece, right? But the only question is, what does my opponent have to do in order for me not to win this game? And there's only one answer. This pawn must die, okay? Pawn on a6 has to be taken out. If that pawn is taken out, and let's say we save our knight, it should be a straightforward victory, okay? But he failed to take out the pawn. So we have this, and now this is a crazy move, right? Knight to h5, taking it away from the action. He needs to be coming towards his pawn, right? Simple as that. And these king moves are too little too late. We saw that the king can the king's job is to accompany one of these pawns to promotion, right? This knight's job is to eliminate that pawn. If the knight eliminates that pawn, then there's no problem. But here we've got king moves instead of getting the knight across to a square, maybe even defended by the king, where it can eliminate that pawn. And now the knight moves, but it's too slow, it's too late. Knights are slow pieces. You have to prepare their journey and give them enough time to do what they want to do. And now I can just keep forcing checks, you see. And he's in check until he's in a position where he loses his knight. All right? So pretty straightforward in the end. But you've got to dial in. You've got to be asking that question. What is critical in this end game? When you're in a situation where you're up in material, but this is the other thing to bear in mind, right? When your opponent has pawns on both sides of the board, okay, now if white had had a bishop instead of a knight, this pawn wouldn't have been such a threat, because a bishop could be over here, say, and boom, capture the pawn as soon as it promotes, okay? Or light square bishop, likewise, right? But he doesn't have a light square bishop, he's got a knight, and knights are slow. Okay, so swapping off the queens at this point is understandable. It's very understandable, and it still should have been a winning position for white. So let's quickly have a look at the analysis on this. Okay, so black played 94 accuracy. I played with 2 blunders, he had 5. Right, so let's do a quick check. Alright, so book. This is good. Okay. And now, apparently this isn't an accuracy. The best move was knight to e7. Alright. Okay, so anyway. So castles, that's good. It's a fine move. Takes is best. That's a mistake. And now bishop out here, not the right idea, but this is a blunder, right? So this is my first blunder. White is now +6 because the best move, inaccuracy. Best move was to retreat the bishop. Okay, that's interesting. But it keeps my bishop on the board, I guess, and keeps it lined up with the knight, with my opponent's king. Here, we might have had, say, knight takes bishop, but then rook recaptures. And look, I can still castle and put my rook on f8. Okay, so I get that does kind of make sense to me now. Okay, so we have bishop takes, rook takes, king takes. White is +6 here. Okay, queen takes the pawn is the best move. Good. Inaccuracy. Best move with check. Good. Inaccuracy. Alright, so what should I have played there? Queen back there. Interesting. So we play here. Blocks. That's okay. That's fine. This is an inaccuracy. Okay. Queen is a mistake. Why is it a mistake? Let's see what the best move would have been. Hang on. So he shouldn't have done that. Hang on. Ooh. Oh, stop. So that's an inaccuracy. Bishop to c2 is best. So he should have moved this bishop back here, apparently. Okay. That's a mistake. So what should I have done? Captured the rook? Wow. But my opponent's still +4 here. Okay, so anyway, I bring my queen back, grab the bishop, best, good. Okay, and now, right, queen to d6 check is best because white is in a winning position, okay? Now, but you've got to be a computer to convert a one position sometimes, okay? Knight to here is good, threatens to win material, but the best move was, there you go, bringing the knight in to the action area. Supports that pawn, that could push forward with check. Then my king would be tied to d8. Good idea. My king can't come here and can't come here. So that would be an excellent move. But here, he plays his knight to g5. I kick the knight, which is not the best move. What's the best move? King to d6. Forget about this pawn. This pawn is not the issue, right? This pawn could be the issue. Plus, I'm activating my king. I'm getting towards the center. Right. So we play that. He takes, takes. That's a good move. It says excellent, actually. The best move would have been, yeah, knight to here with this fork. And then probably, let's kind of work it through from here, okay? So let's say the king goes towards there, I take that, there, and now he's got a straight run to the line. Look where my pawn is. He's already on the 4th rank. He's only got 1, 2, 3, 4 to go, right? I've got king moves, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. White wins. So that was the other situation where he could have won. Yeah, very interesting. And if we look at the graph on here, white is completely won, and still, let's go back. Okay, white is still in a 1 position, +8. Okay, that's decent. King there, king coming in was best. Now, this gives away free material. Okay, it's saying, but the best move here, bet it's the. All right, interesting. So here, white has 1, 2, 3, 4 to remove the pawn and get out, but probably quicker is 1, 2, takes, 5, 6, 7. And still, it's going to be quicker. It's going to be quicker. So let's figure it out. King takes, push. Pawn moves up. He's got to take here. Black's got to take, because otherwise white takes and is away. Black has to take, and it's an easy win now. Okay, so there were several opportunities in that endgame, but it comes down to the critical thing. If white eliminates this pawn, white wins. If white doesn't eliminate this pawn, and the king and the knight are on the wrong side of the board, it's too, it's just not enough to win the game. Several opportunities to win. So that was one. So this is a mistake, moving the king out there. He should have played h4, right? And now he's still winning. King moving up is good. King here. a5 is best. Now moving the knight in is an error. Should have played the king in. Probably then supporting the knight to come in with defense. King there, maybe knight here, something like that. So let's play this through, okay? So king here, still winning for white. Pawn pushes, knight in there, white still winning. Pawn pushes, knight here with a check and forcing. So whatever the king does, knight takes, and we've got the same situation, right? The king has time to get back and defend these pawns. The knight will win the game for white. So lots and lots of opportunities there to win the game. You can't win a game simply by attrition, as in just having a material advantage and thinking that's going to be enough, because the value of material changes dramatically throughout the game, right? My A pawn was the critical piece. So the more that pawn advanced up the A file, the more valuable that pawn became, right? So at some point it became far more valuable than a knight and even a spare pawn, right? It was the critical move, and you've got to slow down and figure that out. You've got to say to yourself, how can my opponent possibly win this game? You must never just rely on a material advantage to win the game for you in the ending. You've got to read it, and you've got to appreciate that material is not just worth its nominal points value. You've got to understand the shape of the board. Now, having a pawn on here with a king near it to protect it, and your king all the way on the wrong side of the board, and your knight all the way on the wrong side of the board, it's simply kind of a misreading of the game. But that's definitely something that comes that improves with experience. You know, losing games like this can be painful, but very, very valuable as well. So I hope that's been useful for you. I appreciate it. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe to Chess Bootcamp if you haven't subscribed, and I'll see you soon.